Hey guys, tonight we begin with an empire that built highways before Google Maps, aqueducts before plumbing, and bureaucracy before email. The Roman Empire, a civilization so obsessed with efficiency that it conquered half the known world, mostly to improve its water pressure. Before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing who's tuning in from across the planet. Rome didn't begin as a marble paradise of genius. It began as a swamp, a glorified campsite full of shepherds yelling at each other across a muddy river. And somehow, those same muddy people built an empire so advanced that 2,000 years later, we're still impressed and a little suspicious. At its peak, Rome stretched across continents, commanded oceans, and invented bureaucracy just to keep track of how great it was. It could supply water to millions, dispose of their waste, and still have time to schedule a gladiator match for dessert. No other civilization in history managed to make indoor plumbing and public slaughter look equally glamorous. The secret behind Rome's greatness wasn't luck or divine favor. It was a lethal mix of discipline, paperwork, and unrelenting competence. Roman engineers didn't dream of flying or writing philosophy. They dreamed about drainage. These were people who looked at a swamp and said, "Let's build a city here. It'll be hilarious." They had no power tools, no electricity, and not a single YouTube tutorial, just geometry, slaves, and sheer determination. And somehow, it worked. Their cities had heated floors, functioning sewage systems, and running water, when most of Europe still thought rain was witchcraft. Rome's genius was control. If nature didn't cooperate, they bullied it into submission. Mountains, they tunneled through them. Rivers, redirected. Deserts, crossed just to prove a point. When they said all roads lead to Rome, they meant it literally, because they built all of them. But Rome's true technology wasn't just its aqueducts or armies, it was pride. The empire ran on pure, undiluted confidence. Every building was a flex, every invention an insult to anyone still using sticks. Even their ruins look smug arches, still standing tall after earthquakes, whispering, "Still up. Are you?" They did all of this without computers, electricity, or humility. Rome didn't invent everything. It just made everything better, louder, and preferably with columns. If you want to know why Rome lasted so long, don't look at its legions or its gods. Look at its concrete. Because while empires crumble, Roman cement refuses to. The Romans didn't invent concrete. They perfected it. They took lime, volcanic ash, and seawater, mixed it together, and created something indestructible. They called it opus cementitium, which basically means, we figured this out before you did. This concrete didn't just last, it healed itself over time. Modern scientists only rediscovered this property recently, proving humanity peaked around 120 BCE and has been improvising ever since. That mix allowed the Romans to pour entire temples, bridges, and harbors that still stand today. The Pantheon, the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome, hasn't moved an inch in 2,000 years. Meanwhile, modern buildings collapse if you breathe near them too hard. But Roman concrete wasn't just durable, it was artistic. They treated it like divine clay, shaping arches, domes, and vaults, so elegant that architects for centuries tried and failed to copy them. They didn't hide their engineering, they showed it off. Every structure shouted, "We could crush you, but we'd rather impress you." They used it everywhere: aqueducts, amphitheaters, baths, even underwater harbors. The Portus Claudius, built with Roman marine concrete, still survives beneath the waves. Modern divers go down to study it, and you can almost hear ancient engineers laughing through the bubbles. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Greek purists sneered at the rough texture and called it ugly, but the Romans didn't care. They weren't building for beauty, they were building for eternity. Concrete wasn't art, it was power you could build with. That's the beauty of Roman innovation. They didn't just build monuments, they built permanence. The empire fell, the emperors vanished, but their walls refused to. The real mystery isn't how Roman concrete worked, it's how the rest of us forgot. 2,000 years later, we still pour weaker cement, build uglier structures, and call it progress. The Romans would have called it incompetence. If concrete was the muscle of Rome, aqueducts were its veins, carrying life, luxury, and the occasional dead rat straight into the heart of civilization. Before Rome, cities relied on rivers and wells, a charming but unhygienic system that usually ended in dysentery. The Romans looked at that and said, "No thanks." Instead, they built 260 miles of gravity-powered waterways that delivered fresh water to over 1 million people. No pumps, no motors, just math, arrogance, and perfect angles. Each aqueduct was a masterpiece of precision. Engineers calculated gradients so subtle that water could flow for 50 miles without spilling a drop. They tunneled through mountains, built stone arches across valleys, and made sure the water arrived with just enough pressure to make fountains dramatic and unnecessary, but deeply satisfying. And yes, they used lead pipes, which might explain why some emperors thought marrying their horse or declaring themselves gods was a good idea. Toxicity aside, the system worked flawlessly. Water flowed through homes, gardens, baths, and fountains built purely to say, "We're cleaner than you." Rome had over 11 aqueducts, each named like a luxury brand: Aqua Marcia, Aqua Claudia, Aqua Virgo, the Evian of antiquity. Their first, the Aqua Appia, was built in 312 BCE and still functions today. Meanwhile, some modern cities can't keep a water main running 5 years without apologizing on local news. At its peak, Rome's aqueducts delivered 200 million gallons of water per day, enough to fill 300 Olympic pools if Rome had cared about sports that didn't end in bloodshed. Public baths stayed open all day. Fountains gushed for pure aesthetic dominance. Even the poorest citizens could enjoy a rinse that didn't involve a puddle. To Romans, plumbing wasn't luxury, it was civilization. Running water separated humans from animals. Ironically, Europe forgot that for the next 1,000 years. Rome didn't just master water, it mastered convenience. And that, more than its conquests or battles, is why its empire still echoes today. Because no one remembers the general who won a war, but everyone remembers the people who built the plumbing. And if there was one thing Romans couldn't stand, it was filth, or at least other people's filth. Their cities were loud, crowded, and full of questionable street food, but somehow clean. Rome managed to do what most medieval cities never could. It figured out how to handle human waste without letting it handle them. At the heart of this genius was the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's first sewer systems. Built around the 6th century BCE, it started as a drainage canal and evolved into a subterranean labyrinth that still carries water today, which is impressive if you ignore what kind of water it's carrying. The Cloaca Maxima collected runoff from streets, baths, and latrines, funneling everything into the Tiber River, where, in true Roman fashion, someone probably still fished. It wasn't perfect, but it kept the city from drowning in its own civilization. And the medieval world wouldn't rediscover that concept for nearly 1,000 years, instead choosing to throw waste out windows and hope for a strong breeze. Rome didn't just build a city, it built a system, one so brilliant that the modern world is still trying to catch up. The empire may have fallen, but its pipes never did. The Romans were fanatical about public hygiene. Every city they built came with public baths, enormous, echoing temples of steam, sweat, and gossip. Inside, you'd find heated pools, saunas, and gymnasiums big enough to make modern spas look like birdbaths. Senators, soldiers, merchants, and slaves, everyone bathed together, discussed politics, traded rumors, and pretended not to stare. Even the toilets were communal. Long marble benches with perfectly aligned holes, no stalls, and a single shared sponge on a stick. Not exactly luxury, but it was efficient. The Romans didn't fear germs because they didn't know what germs were. Yet somehow they still lived cleaner than most 14th century kings. And here's where Rome got clever. They turned sanitation into propaganda. Aqueducts, sewers, and bathhouses weren't just civic utilities. They were statements. Cleanliness meant civilization. Dirt meant barbarism. When Romans looked at conquered territories, they didn't just see enemies. They saw people who still used buckets. Rome was the first society to understand that infrastructure is image. The empire ran on two things, water pressure and pride. Sure, some emperors were insane, but at least their cities smelled better than history usually does. If Roman concrete was the skeleton and aqueducts were the veins, then their roads were the arteries, and Rome had a lot of blood to pump. They built over 250,000 miles of roads, stretching from the sands of Egypt to the fog of Britain, enough to circle the earth 10 times. And knowing the Romans, they probably would have tried just to prove a point. These weren't dirt paths, they were military-grade highways, layered with gravel, stone, and the crushed dreams of anyone who complained about the workload. Every slope, curve, and mile was planned with mathematical precision, because a Roman hated nothing more than inefficiency, except maybe the Gauls. The roads weren't just for travel, they were for control. Armies, merchants, and messages moved across the empire at terrifying speed. A dispatch from Gaul could reach Rome in just a few days, assuming the messenger didn't get mugged, which, statistically, he did, but still faster than anyone else by centuries. Every milestone was a flex, carved with distances and emperor-approved smugness. The Via Appia, the queen of roads, was so perfectly built that you can still walk it today, though now it's mostly confused tourists and stray cats. Each road had layers, large stones at the base, gravel in the middle, and smooth paving blocks on top, slightly tilted for drainage. The result? Roads that outlasted empires, earthquakes, and European weather. The real test of endurance. Modern highways crumble every election cycle. Meanwhile, the Via Flaminia still exists, quietly judging us like, you call that asphalt. But Rome's roads weren't just practical, they were psychological warfare. Every straight, perfect line through mountains and marshes screamed, you belong to Rome now. Try rebelling, we'll be there by Tuesday. And that's what made Rome unstoppable. Not just its legions or emperors, but its logistics. While the rest of the world fought mud, Rome fought time and won. If the roads were the arteries, the courier system was the empire's Wi-Fi, fast, reliable, and occasionally intercepted by barbarians. Rome knew an empire wasn't conquered by swords, it was maintained by communication. Orders had to move faster than rebellions. So they built the Cursus Publicus, the world's first state-run postal service, created by Emperor Augustus, who apparently wanted to receive bad news faster. This wasn't casual mail, it was a logistical masterpiece. Relay stations, fresh horses, and bureaucrats who probably slept in spreadsheets. Couriers carried wax tablets and scrolls sealed with imperial authority. At each station, called a mutatio, they'd swap horses and sprint onward, day and night. Each courier wore an official badge, the ancient version of a government email signature. The system was terrifyingly efficient. The emperor could send a command from Rome to Egypt in under a week. Rebels barely had time to shout freedom before receiving a polite letter reminding them they were, in fact, still property. Because Rome loved control, they built maps, long illustrated scrolls showing every road, town, and relay point. The most famous, the Tabula Peutingeriae, looked like a cosmic spaghetti chart of the known world. Basically Google Maps for people in sandals. But don't get excited, this wasn't public. Ordinary citizens couldn't mail grandma's sandals or love letters. The Cursus Publicus was for official business only, military orders, tax documents, and the emperor's daily micromanagement. Civilians had to trust friends, travelers, or sheer luck. Still, for its time, it was miraculous, a high-speed communication network powered by horses and human endurance. It kept history's largest empire running like clockwork. Not glamorous, just brutally effective. And in Rome, that was the highest form of beauty. Roman architecture worked the same way. It wasn't just functional, it was propaganda carved in stone. Every dome, column, and arch declared, "We are better than you, and we can prove it mathematically." The Romans didn't build small. They built monuments designed to make conquered people forget they were conquered, at least until the tax bill arrived. Their buildings weren't just shelters, they were statements. The Colosseum, for instance, a masterpiece that could seat 50,000 people, with retractable awnings, slave-powered elevators, and better crowd control than modern concerts. All that, just to watch tigers eat accountants. Then there was the Pantheon, a structure so perfect it looks like the gods designed it themselves. Its concrete dome is still the largest unreinforced dome in the world, because, apparently, rebar was for cowards. And that circular opening at the top, the oculus, wasn't just decoration, it was a message, a beam of light from heaven reminding everyone below that Rome had mastered not just engineering, but eternity. Light poured through the Pantheon's oculus like divine approval, a single beam of sunlight blessing the empire's greatest achievement, its own ego. Roman architects didn't just master symmetry, they weaponized it. Arches, vaults, and domes weren't just about strength, they were statements. The Romans turned geometry into theater. Their aqueducts carried water, their bridges defied time, and their temples looked like they were built to outlast God himself. They didn't decorate their buildings with art, they made the buildings the art, and sourced the scale. The scale was psychological warfare. Walking into a basilica or a bathhouse wasn't relaxing, it was humbling. The ceilings soared, the columns loomed, and every mosaic seemed to stare at you like, "Remember your place." Everything in Roman architecture balanced utility with spectacle. The engineering was flawless, but so was the marketing. Every structure said, "We built this for you," but mostly to remind you that you're insignificant. That was the genius of Rome. They didn't build to last, they built to outlast. Even as the empire crumbled, the buildings refused to die. Today, tourists line up to admire ruins that still radiate arrogance. And somewhere, under the dust, you can almost hear an ancient architect whisper, "You're welcome." Rome's true innovation wasn't the sword or even concrete. It was geometry with attitude. Before Rome, architecture was flat. Flat walls, flat ceilings, flat roofs that collapsed the moment Zeus sneezed. Then the Romans looked at gravity and said, no. They perfected the arch, a curve so efficient it redefined physics. The arch redistributed weight, turning stone into motion, aqueducts, bridges, stadiums, all suddenly immortal. Every keystone, every curve, every brick formed a kind of smug, mathematical poetry. The arch didn't just hold the building, it held the empire together. And when one arch wasn't enough, they chained them together into vaults, barrel vaults, groin vaults, cross vaults, elegant names for industrial-level flexing. They filled baths, basilicas, and temples with them, not because they had to, but because they could. The Colosseum alone had 240 arches stacked in perfect harmony like an engineering wedding cake. Each one balanced tension and compression so precisely that modern architects still study it, and quietly cry. But the Romans didn't stop at physics, they made it beautiful. You couldn't walk 10 feet in a Roman city without passing under an arch named after a guy who probably didn't deserve it. Triumphal arches were their version of a press release. We won something. Here's a giant reminder. The Arch of Titus, for example, celebrates the destruction of Jerusalem in glorious marble detail. Nothing says admire our civilization quite like immortalizing someone else's tragedy in stone. That's the Roman way. They didn't just defy gravity, they humiliated it. Their architecture wasn't about surviving nature, it was about outsmarting it in public and with style. 2,000 years later, their arches still stand unbothered, while our glass skyscrapers crack at the first mild earthquake. The Romans may have fallen to politics, plague, and bad leadership, but their geometry still undefeated. And they didn't just build with water, they worked it. Where other civilizations saw rivers as hazards, Rome saw power. They turned flowing water into a labor force that never needed lunch breaks. Roman engineers built massive water mills, hydraulic saws, and grain factories capable of feeding entire cities. The Barbagal Mill complex in southern France had 16 synchronized water wheels, the ancient equivalent of a food processing plant, minus the health inspections. It's often called the world's first industrial site, which is impressive, and also slightly depressing if you've ever waited for your toaster to work. Their ingenuity didn't stop with grain. They built hydraulic marble saws, water lifting devices for irrigation, and mechanical pumps to drain mines. Roman engineering wasn't about invention for its own sake. It was about ruthless practicality. If it saved time, it was sacred. Their secret power source, gravity, the invisible slave that powered the empire. No electricity, no fossil fuels, no sustainability initiative, just pure, disciplined efficiency. Water went in one side, power came out the other. Simple, beautiful, terrifying. Even their entertainment ran on hydraulics. The Colosseum's underground system could flood the entire arena for mock naval battles. Because of course, Rome thought, you know what this gladiator fight needs? Ships. That's how Rome thought, not in limits, in logistics. They conquered not just people, but physics. And long after the emperors turned to dust, the arches still stand, the water still flows, and the geometry still whispers. Rome was here. Because, apparently, watching real ships sink inside a sports arena was the ancient version of special effects. Thousands of gallons of water rushing in and out on command, all for spectacle. What's remarkable is how much of it still works. The ruins of Barbeagle still whisper through their channels and sluices like the ghosts of engineers who never clocked out. 2,000 years later, we still can't decide whether the Romans were geniuses or maniacs. But one thing's clear, they built an empire, not just on conquest, but on motion. Water flowed, gears turned, cities fed, and history quietly admitted defeat. Rome didn't just control nature, it employed it, and it never even had to give it a day off. The Romans didn't just want to rule the world, they wanted to live comfortably while doing it. After all, what's the point of empire if your marble villa feels like a refrigerator? Enter the hypocaust, Rome's version of central heating, invented 2 millennia before anyone else thought to complain about drafts. A furnace beneath the floor, channels that carried hot air through hollow bricks, and flues that vented it through the walls. The result: heated floors, warm baths, and smug satisfaction. Rich Romans could stroll barefoot in January, while northern barbarians were still defrosting by firelight. Public bathhouses ran on the same principle, but on an industrial scale. The baths of Caracalla, for instance, could host thousands at once, each enjoying perfectly regulated heat beneath vaulted ceilings. Beneath it all, hundreds of slaves shoveled wood into roaring furnaces. Efficiency, Roman style. Luxury for the few, cardio for the many. Even their plumbing was ahead of its time. Hot, cold, and even lukewarm water flowed through pipes and fountains, making Roman spas the envy of the world, and occasionally a death trap when the lead content got a little too ambitious. Still, no one could argue with the comfort, and they didn't stop at heating. Wealthy Romans experimented with cooling systems, to storing snow from the mountains in insulated pits to chill wine and cool their dining rooms. In other words, the first form of air conditioning, powered entirely by slaves with sore backs and terrible job descriptions. Rome's obsession with comfort bordered on divine. Every villa, bath, and palace was a temple to convenience, heat, water, light, all harnessed for pleasure, all beautifully wasteful. The empire might have been brutal, but it was never cold. While medieval Europe later prayed its way through winter, Rome had already perfected the art of living like the world belonged to it, because, for a while, it did. The Romans didn't just master warmth, they mastered control over air, over water, over comfort itself, and somehow over everyone else's expectations. And that control extended skyward. Roman builders didn't have engines or cranes that beeped, just ropes, pulleys, and men with terrifying upper body strength. Yet, somehow, they hoisted multi-ton stones into the heavens with a precision that would make modern construction crews cry. Their secret weapon was the treadwheel crane, a massive wooden wheel, big enough for 2 men to walk inside like human hamsters with a death wish. As they trudged forward, the wheel turned, the rope wound, and the block rose. Simple physics, powered by sweat and misplaced confidence. These cranes could lift several tons, and the Romans, being the Romans, immediately tried to lift more. They stacked pulleys, added gears, multiplied force until they could raise columns taller than modern buildings. The Colosseum, the Forum, the Pantheon, none of them would exist without the rhythmic creak of those wheels and the exhausted sighs of the men inside them. And of course, there were no helmets, no harnesses, no days without accident boards. If something went wrong, gravity handled the paperwork. Yet the work got done flawlessly. Roman engineers treated mechanical advantage like divine revelation. They didn't just build cranes, they built systems. Construction sites were symphonies of levers, capstans, hoists, and shouting. They even used counterweights, an idea so clever it wouldn't be reinvented for another 1,000 years. Cranes built cranes. Columns lifted columns. Buildings practically built themselves. If by themselves you mean hundreds of unpaid laborers being yelled at by a man in sandals. Every bridge, basilica, and port owed its existence to these machines. They weren't glamorous like aqueducts or marble statues, but they made those things possible. Rome didn't just conquer the world, it lifted it, one stone at a time. And when you stand before the Colosseum today, staring at its impossible height, remember, it was built without hydraulics, without engines, without unions, just rope, math, and a little bit of madness. If Rome was the muscle of the ancient world, Alexandria was the brain, and occasionally, the lab for experiments no one asked for. Under Roman rule, this city of scholars and show-offs produced machines so bizarre they sound like science fiction. At the center of it all was Hero of Alexandria, mathematician, engineer, and certified overachiever. Hero wasn't content with levers or pulleys. He wanted magic. He built automatic temple doors, self-filling wine cups, singing birds, even a coin-operated vending machine that dispensed holy water. Yes, 2,000 years ago, you could insert a coin and get divine hydration, proof that capitalism and religion have always gotten along just fine. But his masterpiece was the Aeolipile, the world's first steam engine, a hollow metal sphere that spun as steam escaped through its nozzles. It powered exactly nothing, but it looked incredible doing it. It existed purely to make people go wow, and then move on with their day. Much like modern tech demos, the Romans were impressed, but not inspired. They saw Hero's spinning globe and asked, "Cute, but can it build an aqueduct?" It couldn't, so they shelved the steam engine for the next 1,700 years, humanity's longest procrastination. Still, Alexandria became the ancient world's innovation hub, a fever dream of intellect and ego. Automata, water organs, hydraulic clocks, even temples that opened with fire and fountains that sang. The line between science and sorcery blurred until people started praying to engineers. Hero and his peers didn't invent to solve problems. They invented because they could. It wasn't practicality, it was performance art. And that's what made Alexandria remarkable. While Rome built for eternity, Alexandria built for wonder. One gave us concrete and sewers. The other gave us the first vending machine and an early prototype of "Look what I made." If Rome conquered the world through discipline, Alexandria conquered imagination. And for one brief, glittering moment, both empires met in genius. The Romans, of course, weren't born sailors. They were landlubbers, with great sandals. But once they realized half the Mediterranean was inconveniently water, they did what Romans always did, copied someone else, and made it terrifying. By the late Republic, they had built one of the most formidable navies in history. Their ships weren't elegant like Greek triremes. They were floating battering rams, all timber, bronze, and aggression. When the Carthaginians mocked Roman sailors as amateurs, Rome simply captured one of their ships, reverse-engineered it, and built a fleet of 120 in 2 months. Nothing says learning curve like weaponized plagiarism. Their real innovation was the corvus, a boarding bridge with a massive iron spike. It slammed into enemy decks so Roman soldiers could storm across and turn naval battles into ground combat, their preferred environment for stabbing things. Brilliant, if slightly suicidal, since many ships capsized from the extra weight. But strategy has never been about safety. Their shipyards turned warfare into an assembly line, launching dozens of galleys every week, each powered by hundreds of rowers whose dreams mostly involved being anywhere else. Some ships even carried rotating ballistae, enormous crossbows firing flaming bolts across the waves. Imagine being a sailor and realizing your job description included flammable target, and then came the harbor's feats of engineering as durable as their pride. Roman engineers mixed volcanic ash with seawater to create marine concrete that hardened underwater. 2,000 years later, many of those ports still exist, quietly mocking modern coastal cities that crumble after a decade. The Navy itself became the empire's highway system, moving legions, goods, and gossip faster than any caravan. When Rome called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, RC, it wasn't arrogance, it was accounting. The Romans didn't love the ocean, they mastered it. Their fleets didn't explore, they enforced. Every wave carried the empire's echo, every port its flag. Rome didn't just conquer land, it conquered logistics. And in the ancient world, that was far scarier than sharks. For all their love of blood sports and questionable wine, the Romans took medicine surprisingly seriously. They might not have known what germs were, but they understood that sharp tools and unshakable confidence could fix almost anything, or at least make a memorable attempt. Roman doctors, or Medici, were part healer, part improviser, and part gambler. Most learned from Greek physicians, imported along with olives, philosophy, and other things Rome later took credit for. The result was a medical system that was half brilliance, half barbarism, and entirely They had scalpels, bone saws, forceps, even catheters, all forged from bronze or iron and designed to make you question your trust in humanity. Archaeologists have found surgical kits in Pompeii that wouldn't look out of place in a modern hospital. Except these came without anesthesia, gloves, or malpractice insurance. Surgery was often performed in public, which at least saved on theater tickets. And yet, some treatments worked astonishingly well. Roman physicians used opium for pain, vinegar for sterilization, and honey as an antiseptic. They set broken bones, performed amputations, and even carried out cataract surgery with long bronze needles, proof that courage and recklessness are sometimes indistinguishable. Public health was another Roman obsession. They built hospitals, enforced sanitation, and cared about clean water concepts Europe immediately forgot after the empire collapsed. Soldiers were treated in valetudinaria, the world's first organized military hospitals. Imagine a legionary walking in with a javelin wound and walking out only mildly infected. That was progress. Everyday Romans lived with the same practical hygiene. They made soap from animal fat and ash, brushed their teeth with crushed shells, and lathered themselves in creams that could double as sunscreen or slow poison. Cleanliness to them wasn't luxury, it was ritual, hygiene as religion. Of course, when logic failed, medicine drifted toward creative madness. If your condition puzzled a doctor, he might suggest prayers to Asclepius or recommend pigeon dung as a cruel. Science and superstition coexisted like uneasy roommates. Still, for a civilization that fell 1,500 years before germ theory, Rome was shockingly advanced. Their medicine wasn't always gentle, but it was often effective, occasionally heroic, and almost never hygienic. But every empire eventually runs out of momentum or money or sanity. Rome managed to run out of all three at once. By the 5th century, the world's greatest engineers were patching aqueducts, while barbarians tore them down. The empire that built perfect plumbing was now knee-deep in both metaphorical and literal sewage. It didn't crumble overnight, it just decayed slowly, like marble left in the rain. Maintenance lagged, roads cracked, and the great baths went cold. The aqueducts that once carried water now carried rats. People began using the Colosseum as a convenient quarry because, honestly, free stone is free stone. The Pantheon survived mostly because no one could figure out how it worked. Roman concrete, the miracle of chemistry, was forgotten for nearly 1,000 years. Medieval builders tried to replicate it and ended up producing something that crumbled faster than their kingdoms. Plumbing vanished, cities shrank, and Europe returned to its natural state, muddy, cold, and blaming witches for bad weather. Rome's knowledge didn't disappear, it just went into hibernation. Scrolls gathered dust in monasteries, while monks doodled dragons in the margins. Engineers became myths. Science turned to miracle. People stopped asking how things worked and started assuming God handled the details. Yet, even in ruin, Rome refused to die. Its aqueducts still stood like the bones of a forgotten giant. Its roads still sliced through forests that had forgotten who paved them, and its ruins still whispered in the rain, "You had one job." Centuries later, when the Renaissance finally woke from the medieval fog, humanity dusted off Rome's blueprints and realized, with a mix of awe and shame, that the ancients had already done it all first, faster, and better. The secret wasn't lost knowledge, it was lost curiosity. Rome didn't fall because it was ignorant, it fell because it thought perfection could maintain itself. Spoiler, it couldn't, but the legacy endures. Every arch, every dome, every bridge that dares to stand for more than a decade owes something to that empire of engineers. Rome may have fallen, but its ideas never did, because true genius doesn't crumble it, just takes a 2,000-year coffee break before reminding the world who built it in the first place. They say Rome was built on stone, but it was really built on backs like mine. The marble shines because our shoulders carried it there, our hands bled for it, our silence polished it. When the morning bell rings, I rise before the sun, before the city wakes to its own greatness. My name doesn't matter. Names belong to citizens. I'm property, a shadow with a heartbeat. The chains are gone during work hours because they trust exhaustion more than iron. My master is a senator, a man who believes the gods favor discipline and cheap labor. He owns 5 estates, 2 vineyards, and 37 souls. I'm number 14. My first job each morning is to light the fires in the kitchen and prepare the water for the baths. Rome loves its baths more than its morals. The mistress bathes in scented oils while I scrub the tiles, her laughter echoing against marble imported from Greece. The smell of lavender mixes with smoke and sweat. I'm invisible, but always seen. If I move too slow, she calls me useless. If I move too fast, she calls me reckless. There's no correct speed for a slave, only survival. Outside, the city stirs like a beast waking up. The carts rattle over stone roads, vendors shout about olives and bread, and somewhere in the distance, a whip cracks. I've learned to tell the difference between a horse's whip and a human one. One sings, the other screams. After the fires are ready, I carry bread and wine to the master's table. He eats while reading scrolls about philosophy words written by free men debating the meaning of virtue while I stand there. A reminder that freedom often depends on someone else's lack of it. When he finishes, he waves me off like swatting a fly. That gesture is worth more than I'll ever be. In the courtyard, the other slaves gather for orders. There's Darius, an older Greek, who once taught rhetoric before being captured. His hands tremble when he holds a tool, but his voice still sounds like a philosopher's ghost. There's Livia, born into slavery, who's never seen beyond the walls of this villa, but dreams about it anyway. She hums old songs when the guards aren't listening. And there's me, somewhere between obedience and rebellion, too smart to die young and too tired to hope. Today, we're repairing the mosaic floor in the atrium. The tiles shimmer like captured sunlight, each one shaped by someone who will never walk on it proudly. As I work, I overhear the master bragging to a guest about how discipline keeps order. He says we're grateful to serve Rome. I press another tile into mortar and think about how gratitude feels like dust choking your lungs. By noon, the sun burns the courtyard white. Sweat drips down my back, mixing with the grit from the tiles. My hands shake from the heat, but I don't stop. The overseer carries a rod that never tires. When it whistles through the air, even the bravest man flinches. Lunch is a crust of bread and a sip of watered wine. We eat standing up. Talking is discouraged, unless it's about work. Darius once told me the Romans believed the soul could be broken through routine. He might be right. You stop dreaming when every day feels copied from the last. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the Tiber River, and I imagine throwing myself into it. But the Tiber doesn't set slaves free, it just carries their bodies out to sea where no one asks names. Afternoons are for errands. I'm sent to the marketplace to buy oil and spices. The streets of Rome are alive with contradictions, temples to gods who never listen, monuments to victories won by men who never fought, and beggars who once wore armor. The stench of fish, sweat, and perfume collides in the air. A wealthy matron passes by, her sandals clicking like punctuation marks. Her slave walks behind her, carrying an umbrella. I catch his eye for a moment. No words, just recognition. We're everywhere and nowhere, invisible threads holding the empire together. Without us, the marble cracks, the wine spoils, the aqueducts dry. But no one writes about that. History only remembers the masters. When I return, the villa hums with laughter. A dinner party tonight. More work for us, more glory for them. We polish the silver until our reflections vanish in it. Livia arranges flowers, her fingers trembling as she places each stem. The kitchen roars with heat as cooks prepare roasted boar and honeyed figs. I carry platters back and forth, pretending not to hear the guests discussing politics and poetry. They talk about freedom like it's a theory, not a privilege. My master toasts to Rome's greatness, and everyone applauds. I watch wine spill onto the marble floor, the color of spilled blood. No one notices. When the laughter grows loud, I slip away for a moment to breathe under the open sky. The stars look the same for slaves and senators. That's the only equality Rome ever allowed. Later, when the guests are gone and the floors are stained with their joy, we clean in silence. The house smells of smoke, meat, and stale arrogance. Darius coughs quietly. Livia hums again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. I wonder if the gods hear us through the walls of marble they've inspired men to build. When everything is spotless again, the overseer checks our work. His eyes are sharp, his heart dull. He finds a single smudge on a platter and hits Livia across the face. The sound is quick but heavy. She doesn't cry. Crying is a luxury, too. When he leaves, I hand her a wet cloth. She doesn't thank me. We don't thank each other. Kindness is dangerous. Sit makes you remember you're human. Night in Rome feels different when you're not allowed to rest. The villa sleeps, but we stay awake, scrubbing, fixing, existing. I sometimes imagine running. There are stories of slaves who fled to the mountains and became bandits, free for a season before Rome found them. Freedom measured in weeks. Is that worth dying for? Maybe. Sometimes I think yes. Other times, when the stars fade and dawn creeps in, I tell myself surviving is a quieter rebellion. Rome expects its slaves to break. Every day I don't is victory enough. Weeks pass like that, days blending together until time loses shape. Then one morning, everything changes. The master decides to visit his country estate near Capua. He takes half his slaves with him. I'm among them. The journey begins before sunrise. We walk beside the wagons, carrying supplies. The road stretches endlessly, flanked by tombs of dead nobles, reminding us how even in death they claim the best real estate. The countryside smells of dust and olive trees. Along the way, we pass groups of chained Menu captives from the provinces. Their eyes are still wild, their wrists bleeding. I look away. That was me once. The memory tastes like iron and fear. At the villa, the air feels cleaner but colder. The estate is enormous, vineyards rolling over hills like green waves. I'm assigned to work in the wine press, stomping grapes with a dozen others. The juice stains our legs red, and for a moment it almost looks like joy. We sing under our breath to keep rhythm. The overseer pretends not to hear. Even cruelty has its limits. When productivity rises, the days are long, but nights here are quiet. I lie in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the city lights far away. Sometimes I dream I'm walking freely through the forum. No chains, no fear, just the sound of my own footsteps echoing between columns. Then I wake up, and the dream fades like smoke. One evening, while hauling amphorae to the cellar, I overhear a whisper. Darius and 2 others are planning something ugly. Chance to escape during the harvest festival when guards will be drunk and distracted. They want me to join. My heart pounds so hard, I think it might give us away. Part of me screams to say yes. Another part remembers the crucified bodies along the Appian Way, hundreds of them swaying in the wind. A warning carved into flesh. Darius says, living like this isn't living at all. I want to believe him, but hope is expensive, and I'm poor in everything that matters. Days turn into nights, and the festival arrives. Music drifts from the courtyard. Torches flicker. laughter spills through the air thick with wine. The guards drink until their words slur. Darius gives me a look, the kind that doesn't need words. This is it. We move through the shadows, hearts racing, the sound of drums masking our footsteps. The gate looms ahead, open just enough for a miracle. Then a shout. Someone saw us. Chaos erupts. Darius runs. I freeze. A guard lunges, hits me hard, and the world tilts. When I wake, the sun is rising, and Darius is gone. They caught 2 others. The punishment is public. The master orders it done in front of everyone to make an example. Whips crack, skin tears, silence follows. I watch with empty eyes. Rome calls it justice. I call it memory. That night, I sit alone behind the wine presses, the smell of crushed grapes thick in the air. Somewhere out there, Darius might be free or dead. Maybe both. I'll never know. I pick up a handful of grapeskins, let them fall through my fingers like ashes. Tomorrow will come, the sun will rise, and I'll light the fires again. But something inside me has shifted, a quiet rebellion no whip can touch. I can't leave Rome, but I can remember everything, every cruelty, every act of mercy, every name they try to erase. Because one day the empire will fall, and when it does, the stones will still whisper our stories. The marble will remember the hands that built it, and the wind will carry our names, even if no one else does. Rome believes it owns us, but it never owned our echoes. The next morning, the sky feels heavier, as if even the gods are tired of watching. Smoke from the furnaces curls into the dawn, gray and endless. My hands ache, but I move through the motions, fetching water, lighting fires, sweeping the marble floors that will never feel like mine. The overseer watches us with dead eyes, his whip hanging loose at his side. No one speaks of last night. The air itself seems to flinch, but inside me, something hums. A quiet, dangerous thing. It isn't anger exactly. It's memory, sharpened into purpose. Rome thinks it owns me, but I've learned its greatest weakness. It believes its walls are eternal. Nothing built by men ever is. Days pass. The grape harvest ends. Wagons creak under the weight of wine jars, destined for people who will never think about whose feet crushed the fruit. Winter creeps in from the mountains. The wind whistles through cracks in the villa walls like a whisper that can't be silenced. Livia falls ill, too weak to stand, too valuable to lose. The mistress orders me to care for her, not out of kindness, but because replacing slaves costs more than healing them. I sit by her straw bed at night, pressing cool cloths to her forehead. She stares at me with eyes that once held songs. "Do you ever think it'll end?" she asks, voice barely a breath. I tell her yes, even though I don't know. She smiles faintly, a ghost of defiance. "Then promise me," she says. "If I don't see freedom, you will," I promise her, though promises are dangerous currency here. By dawn, her fever breaks. She survives. So does something inside both of us. Weeks later, the master announces he's returning to Rome. The city, he says, needs his wisdom. The gods need his sacrifices. The empire needs his speeches. He doesn't mention that the estate has drained him of interest, or that his debts are growing. We load the wagons again. The journey back feels different. The road hums with whispers of rebellion, rumors of uprisings in distant provinces, slaves who've taken up arms, bandits who strike at Roman caravans and vanish into the hills. The guards laugh them off, but I listen closely. Every story begins as rumor. Back in Rome, the city feels hungrier than before. The streets choke with smoke and ambition. I'm reassigned to the baths, a sprawling complex where citizens come to wash away guilt and sweat in marble luxury. My job is simple: keep the furnaces hot, the floors clean, the patrons invisible in their own comfort. I stoke the fires until my arms feel like stone. The heat is unbearable, but so is stopping. Sometimes, as steam rises through the pipes, I imagine the whole place collapsing, the marble cracking, the pools flooding, washing everything clean, every chain, every lie, every empire pretending to be eternal. Then I return to work. Dreams can get you killed faster than laziness. One evening, a new face appears among the bath attendants. A young man, barely older than me, with scars on his wrists that tell familiar stories. His name is Cassian. He works quietly but moves with purpose. That night, as we clean the empty pools, he whispers, "You were at Capua, weren't you?" My breath catches. He says Darius made it. He reached the hills, joined others, built a camp where no Roman dares to go. My heart stumbles in my chest. Cassian says they call themselves the Forgotten Legion, men and women who refuse to be erased. They're planning something vast. When it happens, he says, you'll hear it in the streets. Then he smiles, small and knowing, before walking away. I stand there long after he's gone, the echo of his words burning hotter than the furnaces. Days stretch into months. Rome prepares for another festival, feasts, races, and endless celebration of itself. The masters drink to glory, the slaves work to exhaustion, but beneath the laughter, tension hums. You can feel it in the markets, in the barracks, in the way soldiers keep their hands near their swords. Something is coming. One night, Cassian slips me a note hidden in a bundle of towels. It's a single phrase, scratched hastily in charcoal. When the fires burn on the Aventine, it begins. My hands tremble as I read it. I burn the note immediately. Fire leaves no witnesses. The night comes quietly. The city glitters under torchlight. Music spills from villas, wine from cups, arrogance from every corner. I'm on duty in the baths, feeding the furnaces, sweat stinging my eyes. Then I hear it, distant shouting, faint but growing, a sound not of celebration, but of movement. I climb to the roof. From there, I see it, the Aventine Hill, glowing red against the dark fires. Dozens of them. My breath catches. It's begun. For a moment, the city pauses, confused. Then chaos spreads like flame. Bells ring, soldiers shout, horns blare. I can see shapes moving through the streets, hundreds, maybe thousands. Not rioters, not bandits. People, slaves, laborers, beggars, all rising like a tide Rome never thought possible. The guards race past, their armor gleaming in the firelight. I should run, I should hide, but something stronger pulls me forward. Cassian finds me before I move. Now, he says, the gates are open. We run through alleys, thick with smoke. I hear screams, steel, the sound of breaking chains. The air tastes like freedom and ash. We reach the outskirts of the city, where carts burn and horses rear in panic. Beyond the walls, in the flickering dark, I see them, figures emerging from the hills, torches held high. Darius among them, his beard longer, his eyes wilder, but unmistakably alive. When he sees me, he laughs, a sound too full of disbelief to be joy. You're late, he says. I want to speak, but there's no time. The battle swallows us whole. The night becomes a blur of chaos, soldiers clashing with freedmen, smoke curling like ghosts above rooftops. I fight not with skill, but with desperation. A stolen blade, a heartbeat of courage. Rome bleeds, and for the first time, it feels mortal. Cassian falls beside me, struck by a spear. I drag him to cover, but his breath already rattles. "Keep going," he whispers, and I do. Not because I'm brave, but because stopping feels like surrender. By dawn, the fires fade. The revolt fails. Rome survives, as it always does, but something inside it cracks. The empire will pretend nothing happened, rewrite it into silence. But I was there. I saw the fear in their eyes, the realization that even marble can tremble. Weeks later, I'm caught. Not for fighting, but for existing near rebellion. They chain me, parade me through the streets as an example. The crowd watches, some with pity, most with indifference. Rome loves its theater. At the forum, they line us up for punishment. A magistrate reads the charges, words heavy with self-righteousness. When he asks if I have anything to say, I raise my head and meet his gaze. My voice doesn't shake. "You can break my body," I say, "but not the hands that built yours." The crowd murmurs, the magistrate frowns. Then he waves his hand, and the sentence is carried out. Pain explodes, but in that moment, I see it Livia in the crowd, eyes wet, lips whispering a prayer. Darius, somewhere in the hills, free Cassian's torch, lighting the night. Maybe Rome wins today, but not forever. They leave me at the edge of the city, broken but breathing, a kind of mercy, or maybe forgetfulness. I crawl into the woods, the scent of pine replacing the stench of the streets. Days blur into each other. Fever, hunger, rain. But I keep moving. Something drives me, a promise, a whisper, the thought that maybe freedom isn't a place, but a decision. One morning, I wake to sunlight filtering through trees and realize I'm not alone. Figures emerge from the mist, runaways, outcasts, survivors. A small camp hidden deep in the hills. They take me in, no questions asked. Among them, I find Darius again, older, scarred, smiling. "Welcome home," he says. And for the first time in my life, the word feels real. Years pass. Rome still stands, glittering and rotting in equal measure. But out here, beyond its reach, something else grows, a different kind of empire. Not of marble or gold, but of people who remember. We build shelters, plant crops, teach children who have never felt a whip. Darius tells stories of philosophy and freedom by the fire. Livia joins us later, limping but alive, her laughter sharper than any sword. At night, I look toward the horizon, where Rome glows faintly, and I feel no fear. The empire thinks we vanished. It's wrong. We're the roots under its roads, the ghosts in its stones, the reminder that no chain lasts forever. Sometimes travelers come through, bringing news. Emperors rise and fall, wars begin and end, cities burn and rebuild. History keeps marching, but quietly, in the shadows, we endure. And one day, long after I'm gone, when Rome itself crumbles into dust, and its name becomes a legend, maybe someone will find a broken mosaic or a forgotten tool buried in the earth. Maybe they'll wonder who made it. Maybe they'll feel, just for a moment, that pulse of defiance still beating beneath the soil. That will be enough. Because the truth is, I was never born free, but I will die unwound. The hands that once carried Rome now build something purer, something not carved in stone, but in memory. The empire believed it conquered the world, but it never conquered the human spirit. And somewhere in the wind that sweeps through the ruins, long after Rome is gone, you'll hear us still whispering, laughing, alive, because we were the ones who built eternity. And this time, it belongs to us.